My primary query when heading into Expedition 33 was to see whether it would gamble and try to stand out within the turn-based genre or simply keep it basic and simple. Most of these games provide several characters, each belonging to a specific class or role whose label will depend on the language of whatever the setting is, but can be generally categorized into the traditional fantasy roles of tanks, supports, and damage dealers. Each of the characters usually has several abilities, unlocking more as they level up, and they generally rely on a resource pool, usually either mana or stamina, to determine how often they can use these abilities. Usually the challenge within fights, especially when dungeon crawling, is the decision between whether to spend resources to use your most powerful abilities to destroy enemies quickly, or to hold on to the abilities for a future bigger battle where you can get much more value out of them, but then risk taking more damage from enemies by stretching fights out longer than they need to be. These risks can be further mitigated by acquiring better defensive gear to basically reduce the damage you take outright. Now, this is what I would call the safe way, the standard way to do this. Most games do it like this. The Like a Dragon games, Octopath Traveler, Persona, most of these games that still use the turn-based system, they do it like this. On the other hand, Expedition 33 chose to go with an alternative ability point-based approach, mixed with a reliance on Souls-like reaction-based blocking and parrying of enemy attacks, and it cannot be understated how important this blocking and parrying mechanic is. I see it as easily the make or break feature of this game, the one that determines whether or not you'll be able to actually enjoy it. When I saw it in the trailers, I assumed it would be similar in implementation to the one in Yakuza Like a Dragon, which is a game I played the hell out of. In that game, blocking right as the enemy attacks reduces some of the damage taken from said attack, and that's basically the end of it. It's not something you need to do, but if you can, it can be used to provide additional damage mitigation on top of your gear and class stats. Expedition 33 is not like that at all. If you cannot dodge or parry, at least on the normal difficulty, which I played on, I assume it's much more crucial on higher difficulties, you are in for a rough time. Everything in the game's combat design has been tuned to incentivize this mechanic. Enemies that are on level par with the main team hit extremely hard. This is coupled with a limited amount of healing items, so simply tanking the damage is not an option, as it leads to burning through healing resources very quickly if you want to stay alive. So why not just use healing spells to deal with them then? Well, that's also not as straightforward. Due to the AP combat system, characters must perform specific actions in combat in order to earn ability points that they can then consume to perform their various skills. This AP does not carry over across combat encounters, so it's not like you can stack it up, and it must be generated afresh in each encounter. So luckily that means there is no mana or stamina, but it can still mean that you can't just set off your best abilities right at the start of the fight and just nuke the fight. Luckily there's an item for generating this resource, but like the others it's also limited. So relying on healing spells also only tends to drag encounters out longer than ideal, and waiting for AP points to generate puts you at a greater risk of taking even more damage and getting knocked out in the meantime. Plus, I don't know if this is a bug or a feature, but I did put quite a number of defense points into some of my team member stats, but they don't seem to create any material difference in the amount of damage they can take versus other characters. It's strange how trivial the difference is here. The stat seems to mostly serve as a scaling attribute to power specific weapons instead of something to actually mitigate damage. If an enemy, let's say a big boss who's on level par with your team, is able to knock your team out with like 4 hits, like a full random member from 100 to 0 in 4 hits, even if you put a lot of stats into defense, the most you can do is maybe change it from 4 to 5 hits. That's the best that I saw. It doesn't suddenly make it such that one person can take 4 hits and another can take like 8 or 10 hits. No, the difference is never that big. The point to all of this is that taking damage directly in this game is a bad idea, especially once you get to certain bosses around the midpoint, or at least in Act 2. You either dodge and parry, or you can just expect to die relatively quickly. no matter how many healing or defensive options you have. Hell, at one point a status effect called inverted is introduced that basically hurts you if you try to heal. So at that point it felt like the devs were saying to me, hey, you either parry these attacks or you're done here. Now luckily for me, engaging in a lot of Souls-like games recently has had me getting a lot of practice in timing-based reaction combat over the last year or so. But I imagine this could be a deal breaker for people that expected this to be more of a traditional turn-based affair, which I'll be honest is what I expected. Because there is both some bad and some good to this mechanic. The fact is, the worst aspect of this mechanic is that it functions like a quick time event where you can't see the on-screen prompt. You don't simply have to press the right dodge, jump, counter, parry or super parry buttons. You have to press them at the right time during the enemy's attack animation at a specific spot. And how do you learn exactly at which point you're supposed to press it? Just like with Souls-likes, it's trial and error. I found that most of the attacks could be easily intuited, especially with the slower enemies, in order to dodge or parry them. But the team seems to have taken, the dev team seems to have taken a healthy amount of inspiration from Souls-like games. This means that many enemies will try to fake you out with those signature extended wind-up animations or the dummy animations that are meant to bait the player into reacting at the wrong time and then getting hit. So depending on how tricky the attack animation is for a particular enemy, it could require a lot of trial and error before you figure out exactly at which points to respawn well in order to handle its attacks. But once you do, then the only task left is the mechanical effort of hitting the buttons at the right time. If you can do it well enough, you're basically invincible and the game becomes a joke. If on the other hand you cannot, the game can become frustrating beyond measure, like any Souls-like. So the good thing here is that unlike those other games, the difficulty can be lowered, so at least there's an option to reduce that friction. And also when you die, you're usually placed right in front of the enemy that killed you, so you can just try again or go somewhere else. The penalty for loss is not very high. So the question at hand is, does this system succeed if you can use it consistently? For me, yes. I think it provides an interesting option when it comes to optional enemy encounters. Throughout this game, you will encounter many boss enemies that sort of just stand there as if inviting a challenge. If you choose to take them on, they will almost certainly outlevel and outdamage the team, usually able to take them out within a single hit. The only way to take on these encounters, if you don't want to just leave them for later, is to dodge, parry and counter perfectly. If you can do this, then you can take whatever reward they hold with them and then move along. This is a preferred method to me than the traditional RPG affair where there is no way to take them on rather than simply going out and grinding levels for hours or just coming back at a later point in the game when your team is beefy enough to survive all the attacks and then take the enemy on like a regular encounter. So after a good number of hours of this, I'm heading towards the end. My takeaway is that it's a gamble that pays off, but it won't work for everyone, which is why it's a good thing there's at least options to tone it down. But I expect that at some point as the game keeps getting patched, that some of these mechanics such as enemy dodge and parry windows for certain abilities and certain enemy encounters are going to get adjusted to make them a little more forgiving. Maybe with an additional 1 or 2 frames of acceptable player input, because some of them are super tight. And when the enemy has like 4 to 8 hit combos in their flow that are extremely highly damaging, it can feel extremely unforgiving just trying to get through just the entire combo. Maybe I'm just bad at it and it's not a big deal to better players, but I suspect this will probably be highlighted by many others. Yeah, and that's it. I'm considering making a separate video on the story as I think it has an interesting setup. However, I want to take all the time in the world to explore the overworld before I head towards the final areas to end the game. So I decided to put my thoughts on the main gameplay mechanic out separately, just make it its own video. We'll see how that goes. Thanks for watching.